Shrinking is all about grief, bad coping choices, and therapy lines getting way crossed. So let's rewind both seasons and break down everything that went down. We are introduced to Jimmy, a therapist spiraling after his wife's death. During a session, he snaps at Grace, a woman in an abusive marriage, and bluntly tells her to leave her husband or he won't treat her anymore. Later, Grace calls to say she left and thanks him. Jimmy's coworker Gaby refers him a new client, Sean, a veteran with severe anger issues. Instead of standard therapy, Jimmy takes a risky approach and brings Sean to a boxing gym to channel his rage safely. At home, Jimmy struggles with his daughter, Alice. He tries to reconnect, but she reminds him that he wasn't there for her. Jimmy and Sean rush to Alice's soccer game, where Grace's husband shows up and punches Jimmy. Sean steps in to defend him and ends up getting arrested. Jimmy reconnects with his estranged lawyer friend Brian, who helps Sean legally, but Jimmy turns down his pickleball invite. Jimmy realizes neighbor Liz knows more about Alice's life and has basically been raising her. Thinking Alice already rejected him, Jimmy goes to play pickleball with Brian. Later, Sean's parents kick him out, and Alice comes home to find Sean staying there after Jimmy invites him. Ignoring his co-workers, Paul, warning about mixing work and personal life, Jimmy gets even more involved with his clients, even showing up on one client's date to coach him, and it works. At home, Alice is adjusting to Sean living there, while Paul opens up about having Parkinson's and the future impact it will have. Jimmy worries about Gaby after seeing her with another man, but she explains she and Nico are divorcing and she's okay. When Paul realizes Sean is living with Jimmy, he confronts him for risking Alice's well-being, but Jimmy brushes it off, until he later sees Grace back with her husband, despite claiming she was doing great alone. Paul warns that Sean living with Jimmy will ruin therapy, and he's right. Sean shuts down when asked about Afghanistan. Paul also hides his Parkinson's from his daughter Meg. At home, Alice mentions she once slept with Liz's son Connor, causing Jimmy to snap and yell at Liz. Jimmy later pushes Sean to open up, making him storm off. Around the same time, Connor comes home from college and starts texting Alice. Jimmy eventually apologizes to Connor, Liz, and Sean, and he and Sean quietly watch a game together. That night, Alice sees Sean asleep, comments on how attractive he is, and it's clear Sean may be a bigger issue than Jimmy realized. At work, Gaby runs marriage counseling and gets awkwardly questioned about practicing her own advice since she's divorced, while Brian once again backs out of proposing to Charlie and snaps when pushed. Sean meets his dad, but the visit goes badly when Afghanistan medals trigger him, causing him to leave and text Alice, who skips school to walk with him. Jimmy finds Grace, who admits she lied because she felt judged. When Jimmy later checks on Sean after learning he climbed a water tower, Sean says the advice didn't help, fires Jimmy as his therapist, and says he's moving out. With no one else to turn to, Alice convinces Paul to help Jimmy. Paul talks to Sean about Afghanistan, shares his fear about telling his daughter about Parkinson's, and finally calls Meg to tell her the truth. Sean is finally ready to do real therapy, while Paul hints Jimmy still hasn't faced his own grief. Brian asks Jimmy and Gaby to host his surprise engagement party for Charlie, which quickly turns chaotic. Paul shows up drunk and high, venting about Meg, and Jimmy spends the night getting condolences about Taya. Jimmy catches Alice drinking and drunkenly confronts her about Sean. Alice later tries to kiss Sean, but he shuts it down, reminding her she's a kid. Jimmy admits to Gaby he's struggling with people idealizing his marriage. He throws up right as Brian proposes, but Charlie says yes. Afterward, Gaby shows Jimmy a photo of Tia in love with him. Then they hug and kiss. Jimmy and Gaby wake up together, and while Gaby has no regrets, Jimmy is clearly struggling. Jimmy goes on an apology tour, starting with Brian and then Alice. Paul apologizes to Meg for being absent, and she forgives him, but things blow up when he refuses her offer to move in. Later, Jimmy talks to a photo of Tia about sleeping with Gaby, not realizing Alice overhears and is clearly upset. Jimmy and Gaby try to explain things to Alice, but she shuts it down and vents to Paul, who tells her to cut Jimmy some slack. Alice sneaks out to a party and a college dorm, sending Jimmy into a panic. While searching, Brian admits he doesn't want Jimmy officiating his wedding, which hurts Jimmy. They find Alice, and after Paul pushes him, Jimmy finally stands up to Brian and grounds Alice. Meanwhile, Gaby goes with Liz and Sean to Nico's art show, realizes he's crediting his new girlfriend instead of her, calls it out publicly, and leaves. Brian eventually asks Jimmy to officiate his wedding again. Paul is set to receive a major career award in Vegas, but feels undeserving. Gaby learns Paul is sleeping with his doctor, Julie, reconnects with Nico, nearly slips back into old habits, but instead sleeps with Jimmy and decides to move forward by applying for a professorship. Sean hates the accounting job his dad gets him, and with Alice's help plans a catering business, with Liz agreeing to invest. In the end, Paul skips Vegas to attend his grandson's play, making Meg happy. Jimmy tries to move on by packing up Tia's things and taking off his wedding ring. We find out that Gaby already got the professorship job after Liz and Jimmy confront Paul for making her write her own recommendation letter and favoring Jimmy. At Brian and Charlie's wedding, Jimmy convinces Brian's dad to be best man and officiates the ceremony himself. That luck turns dark in the final moment when Grace goes hiking with Donnie. Her husband takes one last insult and pushes him off a cliff. But before we dive into the next season, if you are enjoying this recap, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more recaps on your favorite shows. Season 2 opens with Jimmy visiting Grace in prison and having a nightmare where Paul pushes him off a cliff. He wakes up to real life, where Connor is back and still interested in Alice. Jimmy admits his guilt over Grace, and when he visits her with Brian, she blames his advice for landing her in prison. Paul pushes Julie away as his Parkinson's worsens. Sean's food truck is thriving, but a call from his Afghanistan past rattles him, and he lies about it. Things spiral when Sean's case is transferred to Paul, forcing Jimmy to face the harm his methods may have caused. Jimmy runs into the man who caused Tia's death, losing it. Alice focuses on her driving test while Jimmy and Gaby keep openly flirting at work. Alice passes her test and Jimmy finally tells her about seeing the driver, which she appreciates. Liz lines up a job interview for Sean, but it triggers his soldier past. Paul tries to help with a visualization exercise, and after tension with Jimmy over boundaries, Sean finally tries it and relaxes. Paul reconnects with his former patient Ray, and later Alice sits outside the driver's house, watching. Alice admits to Paul she visited the drunk driver and promises not to go back. Sean's dad discovers the food truck and admits he always wanted to start a business with Sean, which Liz overhears. Jimmy and Gaby grow tense. Connor and Summer, Alice's friend, start dating, and Alice says she's fine with it. Things unravel when Jimmy and Brian find Grace living with her husband again while handling divorce papers. Paul visits Julie's husband, who suffers from dementia, and admits his fear of putting Julie through Parkinson's, and Julie later asks Gaby to talk to him. Alice breaks her promise and confronts the driver again, while Liz secretly sells her share of the food truck to Sean's dad, upsetting Sean. Grace has one final session with Jimmy and leaves the city with her sister. Paul changes neurologists, and Alice spirals, impulsively kissing Connor after seeing the driver. Alice wakes up in Connor's bed and sneaks out. Jimmy hangs out with Brian, where Charlie admits he wants to adopt, and Brian worries he'd be a bad dad. At Liz's house, Gaby meets a friend named Derek and briefly considers dating him until she's pulled away by a family emergency. Meanwhile, Sean finally opens up to Jimmy about his dad abandoning him after Afghanistan and kicking him out under the excuse of tough love. Later, Brian runs into the drunk driver Louie, returning Alice's wallet, and decides to help him. Paul and Jimmy agree Sean eventually needs to confront his father. While shopping with Liz, Jimmy accidentally brings up her ex, Mac, which upsets Derek, Liz's husband, and creates tension. Connor admits to Summer that he slept with Alice, damaging Summer and Alice's friendship. To cope, Alice and Jimmy get matching tattoos with Tia's initials. Paul spends time with his kids and ex-wife and admits guilt over cheating, only to learn she forgave him long ago. Sean confronts his father, then snaps and starts a fight with construction workers. Sean ends up in the hospital after the fight, so Jimmy convinces Paul to track down his checked-out father. Meanwhile, Alice gets her wallet back with an apology from the drunk driver, Lewis. After Brian explains Lewis's life is falling apart, Alice meets him herself, hears him take full responsibility for Tia's death, and chooses to forgive him. Paul and Jimmy push Sean's dad to face his son, leading to a reconciliation and forgiveness. Elsewhere, Connor spirals after breaking up with Summer, and Liz tells him to go back to school. Gaby makes peace with her sister about their mom, and a lonely Liz reconnects with Mac over dog photography. Sean is back home and doing better. At Liz's house, Brian announces he and Charlie plan to adopt, and there's clear chemistry between Gaby and the new Derek, who later asks her on a real date. Paul warns Liz that Mac wants more than friendship, which she ignores. Things blow up when Jimmy learns Alice and Summer were suspended after a fight sparked by Summer's online attacks. Brian panics over a possible immediate adoption, crashes Gaby's date, and everyone ends up at the beach, where Brian and Charlie admit they're not ready and choose to stay kid-free. Liz kisses Mac, confesses to Paul, then tells Derek, who reacts badly. Gaby and the new Derek finally kiss. Jimmy unexpectedly finds Alice, Brian, and Louie together. The moment triggers a long flashback to 3 years earlier, when everyone's lives were very different. Back in the present, Jimmy confronts Brian and Alice, who explain what happened with Louie, and Alice suggests Jimmy forgive him too. Derek confronts Mac, and it goes surprisingly well. Derek realizes he overreacted and understands how overwhelmed Liz has been. Meanwhile, Sean joins Paul at the doctor and learns Paul must stop drinking. Jimmy later visits Lewis, forgives him, but firmly tells him to stay away from his family and friends. Brian announces he and Charlie are trying to adopt a mixed-race baby. Alice goes on a pizza date with Dylan, who suddenly feels more mature after saving Jimmy from choking. Gaby learns her sister is joining the army, something Sean encouraged. Brian and Charlie meet the baby's mother, but aren't chosen over a straight couple, and Charlie admits he's relieved. Alice gets invited to a school dance and goes dress shopping with Gaby while Jimmy keeps his distance, and Gaby ends up letting her mother move in despite trying to set boundaries. Jimmy and Brian help Gaby's mom move in. Around the same time, Julie's husband dies. As Alice's 18th birthday approaches, Jimmy plans a big surprise, a car like her mom's, while Sean handles the cake and the group sets up the party. At work, Gaby babysits a patient's kid, leading to a blow-up with Paul where they call each other out for avoiding their issues. Paul later apologizes to Julie and asks her to move in, which pushes Gaby to confront her mom unsuccessfully. Alice's birthday goes well, and Jimmy gives her the car. Later, Alice gets a goodbye text from Lewis, confronts him, and realizes Jimmy asked him to step away. She then confronts Jimmy, right as he gets a text from the car's previous owner. Alice wants to help Louie, but Jimmy refuses. Paul realizes his meds aren't working and tries to see his neurologist, only to find her on a date with Sean. Gaby hosts Thanksgiving without inviting Derek, admitting she's unsure about the relationship. Derek, Liz's husband, later offers Sean a cheap place to live, overwhelming him. Alice and Summer hang out with Lewis, while Brian and Charlie get huge news. The baby's mother chose them. The season 2 finale opens with Jimmy in therapy with Paul, who pushes him to finally be honest with Alice about Louie's. Gaby invites Derek to Thanksgiving, but he turns her down. Liz feels the empty nest again with Connor and his brothers not around, until her husband suggests she become Brian and Charlie's nanny, which she happily accepts. Alice comes home and reconciles with Jimmy. At Thanksgiving, Julie brings Paul despite his resistance, and Derek surprises Gaby by showing up with her mom. As everyone shares gratitude, Lewis gets uninvited from the Thanksgiving gathering with his friends because of his past and heads to the train station. Just before he jumps, Jimmy finds him and sits with him, refusing to let him be alone. So after everything Jimmy's done to help the people around him, do you think he's actually healing or just finding new ways to avoid his own pain?